Welcome back to Between Two FARS. I'm Warnke Miller, here again with Bob Tepfer, and we are talking about different types of contracts. Today, we're going to talk about variable quantity contracts. And oftentimes you hear these referred to as IDIQ contracts, but they've got a couple of different names and a couple of different purposes. Bob, can you just give us an overview of what types of contracts fall into this bucket?
Well, we have historically the requirements contract, and a requirements contract is, in large part, you don't know what you're going to need, and you effectively contract to do all your requirements in a specific area. Now, the government's obligated to put together a reasonable estimate, and I'll tell you a little history about that. A lot of times, folks would just very quickly put down an estimated quantity, and then subsequently they would turn to the contractor, and perhaps it would be much larger than what they thought they would need, and they would speak to there being an obligation. In fact, there's an old contract that deals with a pig farmer at Fort Bragg who used to take all the garbage from the fort. And overnight, the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred, and what he did was he effectively agreed to take it all their requirements, and overnight they moved thousands of troops in, and he was bound by it. And theoretically, at the time, it was viewed as a requirements contract, and the issue is you don't know. So they came up with, they might have a maximum order or a minimum order when they put it together, and a maximum total. But the estimated quantity should be based in large part upon the history of the requirement. In the case of the pig farmer, the estimate was probably realistic. They had no history of anything like that. If they'd had a maximum, it might have been a lot safer. The problem you have with requirements contracts are that, they all routinely come in and they claim the estimate is bad, so you better have very good as to how you put it together. The other problem that you have is, let's say the performance is not all that you'd hoped it would be. Your only alternative is to default terminate the contractor. And that can be very labor intensive. It can end up in litigation where they normally assert the estimate was bad or the performance was in fact satisfactory. And that's not a good thing. And so you might end up going through the entire period of time not very happy. So what they came up with was another type of variable quantity contract, the indefinite quantity, indefinite delivery contract.
Now, we don't use requirements contracts a whole lot at JSC, do we? But no. We do use an awful lot of IDIQ contracting.
We used to use them a lot.
What's the benefit?
We used to use them a lot, meaning the requirements contracts, and they used to be used a lot in DOD. The IDIQ contracts, the reason why they didn't use them is the IDIQ might cost you a little bit more, and IDIQ to a large extent has a minimum. Okay, there's not a firm obligation past the minimum, and you have to obligate the minimum amount. It has to be more than a nominal amount. But the beauty of that, even though you have to obligate that when you award the contract, and in the requirements contract you didn't have to necessarily, the beauty of it is after you get to the minimum, the government has total discretion. In other words, you can put on the work. If they don't perform to your satisfaction, you can elect to go get another contract. You can even have a competing contract and check whether or not it's good. And because implicit in that entire arrangement is proper past performance, contractors tend to realize that, and so they'll satisfy you because they know it's easier than going out and recompeting it. Okay, you also have a minimum quantity with regard to an order, and you also have a maximum quantity. In both types of contracts, the unit price, whether or not it be requirement or indefinite quantity, probably it should be already negotiated. If it's not, you've got probably a SECA violation. The only issue is the quantity. You have a maximum quantity and you order it. The other issue is because it's you don't know the quantity, but you also don't know the delivery date. So it gives you this element of flexibility where you can, say I want it by this date. Now, the terms of the contract may give them a certain number of days notice, or it may give them a certain number of days to deliver. But within that window, you have a certain amount of discretion. And that's really good. And once you get, but you are obligated with regard to the minimum. If for whatever reason you award a contract and you decide not to go forward, you've bought the minimum.
So the flexibility and the fact that you're not obligated beyond the minimum, these are great benefits for the government. What sort of risks do we have for an IDIQ contract?
Well, if it changes dramatically, you have to, in the specification, speak to the type of work you're going to be doing. Okay, if it changes dramatically, you always have the potential for a SICA argument that this is not what we proposed to initially. You have really moved the contract into an area that was beyond the contemplation of the parties. If that's the case, then you could have a cardinal change, which would be a breach if the contractor doesn't want to do it, or a SICA violation, if he's willing to do it, but, somebody else says, I would have proposed. Those are issues that could show up. You do have the same flexibility as you would under any other change clause as far as what the parties contemplate.
That's terrific. We really appreciate this overview of this type of contracting. We've got more to talk with you about, so stay tuned for our next episode as we continue talking through the various contract types and the risks and benefits to the government. See you next time on Between Two FARS.